The day my son looked at me differently was the day I understood something inside my life had already started to break. It was not loud. It did not happen with a fight or shouting. It was quiet, like dust settling on a house that no one cleans anymore. I remember standing in my small kitchen, holding a steel spoon in my hand, stirring tea that I no longer felt like drinking. Outside, the evening was falling slowly over the neighborhood, painting everything in a tired orange glow. My son was in the next room. He had come home late again. And with him, she had come into our lives. I still remember the first time I saw her properly. She walked into my house like she already belonged there. She was not rude, not openly disrespectful, but there was something in the way she looked at me that made me feel like I was already being replaced. I told myself not to think too much. After all, she was my son's choice. And what does a mother do if not accept what her child chooses? That is what I kept repeating to myself. Acceptance. But acceptance is a strange thing. It sounds peaceful when you say it out loud, but when you live it, it can feel like slowly losing parts of yourself. At first, it was small things. My son stopped sitting with me during meals. He said he was busy. He used to tell me everything about his day, even the smallest details. Now, he only spoke when necessary. His words became short, like he was saving them for someone else. Her voice started filling the house more than mine. She would tell him what to eat, when to sleep, how to spend his money, and he would listen. Not to me anymore. One evening, I made his favorite food. I spent hours preparing it, just the way he liked it when he was a child. I even remembered how he used to smile when I added extra spices, how he used to say, "Amy, this is the best thing in the world." I set the plate on the table with hope I did not admit to myself. He looked at it, then at her. She frowned slightly. "It's too oily," she said softly, but her voice carried weight. And then my son pushed the plate slightly away. "I'm not very hungry," he said. That was the first time I felt something inside me fall quietly. Not break completely, just fall. After that, I stopped cooking his favorite meals. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I could not handle the silence that followed my effort. Days turned into a pattern I did not recognize anymore. She would come into the living room and rearrange things. She said it was better organized. My things were slowly shifted, moved, placed in corners where I did not go often. Even my old chair, the one I used to sit on every morning with tea, was moved near the wall. No one asked me. Not him. Not her. One day I asked my son softly, "Do you think I should move this back?" He looked tired. "Amy, she is just trying to help. Why do you make small things big?" Small things. That word stayed with me longer than I expected. Small things like my chair. Small things like my voice. Small things like me. I started spending more time in my room. It felt safer there. The walls did not ask me to adjust. The silence did not judge me. But even there, I could hear life happening outside my door, laughter that did not include me, conversations I was not part of anymore. One afternoon, I overheard them talking. She was laughing about something on her phone. My son was listening, fully present, the way he used to listen to me when I spoke about his childhood. I stood near the door without entering. For a moment, I remembered the boy who used to fall asleep holding my hand. I wondered when I had become someone he only spoke to when necessary. The realization did not come all at once. It came slowly, like water filling a room you did not notice was leaking. The house was still mine, but I no longer felt like I lived in it. One night, I woke up thirsty. I went to the kitchen quietly so I would not disturb anyone. The lights were dim. As I poured water into a glass, I heard her voice in the living room. Soft, confident. "She should understand this is our space now," she said. I froze. There was a pause. Then my son's voice. "Don't be harsh. She is my mother. Not my mother matters. Not she is important. Just she is my mother." Like a sentence that needed explanation. I stood there holding the glass, feeling the cold water shake slightly in my hand. I went back to my room without drinking it. That night I did not sleep. I kept thinking about how love changes without announcing itself, how someone can still be alive, still be present, but slowly stop being felt. I did not hate my son. Even then. Even when something inside me was quietly being taken away. I only felt a kind of confusion I could not explain. Was I too sensitive? Was I becoming a burden without realizing it? Or was I simply becoming invisible in a place I once built with my own hands? The next morning, I smiled when he came to the kitchen. I asked him if he had eaten. He nodded. She was already sitting at the table, scrolling on her phone, not looking up. And I understood something I did not want to understand. This was not going to stop on its own. This was only the beginning. He began calling me less after that night. At first, I told myself he was busy. Every mother learns to repeat this sentence until it sounds like truth. But deep inside, I already knew the difference between busy and distant. Busy people return. Distant people drift without looking back. The house changed in ways I could not point to immediately. It was still the same walls, the same doors, the same smell of morning tea and dust settling in corners. But the feeling inside it had shifted, like furniture moved in the dark while I was asleep. She had started making decisions that were never spoken out loud as decisions. It was always suggestions. Soft words. Carefully placed sentences. You don't need to keep this old cupboard here. This room looks better without so many things. We should make the house more modern. And slowly, what I had collected over years of living began disappearing into storage, into corners, into places I no longer visited. My son would look at me sometimes, as if waiting for me to object. But every time I opened my mouth, I would see his tired expression. And I would stop. Because I did not want to become the reason he felt torn. That is what mothers do. Or maybe that is what I had learned to believe. One evening, I was sitting in my room when I heard voices outside, louder than usual. They were arguing. Not shouting, not breaking, but sharp enough that silence could not contain it. I told you she keeps interfering, her voice said. I am not interfering, my son replied, frustrated. You always defend her. A pause. Then his voice lower. She is my mother. And again, that sentence. My mother. As if I was something to be categorized, rather than someone to be understood. I did not step out. I learned to stay still in moments like this. Stillness became my way of surviving things I could not fix. The next morning, he avoided my eyes. That is how I knew the argument had ended somewhere inside him, not between them. A week later, something happened that changed the shape of my days. I went to the kitchen to make tea and found that my usual cup was missing. It was a small thing. Ridiculous, even. But I knew that cup. It had a small crack on the handle. It was the one I had used for years. It was not valuable in money, but it was part of my routine, my memory, my sense of continuity. I asked quietly, "Did you see my cup?" She looked up briefly. "Oh, that old thing. I think I threw it away. It didn't look safe to use." My son was sitting nearby. He did not say anything. That silence hurt more than her words. I nodded slowly and smiled, because I did not know what else to do with my face. "I see," I said. And I made tea in another cup. But something inside me felt unsettled for the rest of the day. It was not about the cup. It was about how easily something I cared about had been removed without being considered. As if my attachment did not matter enough to interrupt the decision. That evening, I sat alone longer than usual. I started thinking about my life before all this. Before she came. Before silence replaced conversation. Before my son began looking at me like I was a responsibility rather than a person. I remembered when he was small and would run into my arms after school, dropping his bag carelessly, asking me what I had cooked before even greeting me properly. I remembered how I used to sit by his bed when he was sick, counting his breaths through the night. I remembered the way he used to say, "Amy, don't leave me alone." And now I was learning how to sit alone in a house where he lived. That thought stayed with me longer than I expected. The next shift came quietly again. My son started eating dinner at different times. Sometimes with her. Sometimes not at all at home. When I asked him once, he said, "We are just adjusting our routine." Adjusting. Another word that sounded harmless but meant distance. I noticed she was more comfortable now. She moved freely in the house, as if she had memorized its boundaries better than I had. She spoke to him in a tone that was casual, familiar, confident. And he listened, not always agreeing, but always listening. I began to feel like a visitor in my own home. One afternoon, I overheard something I was not meant to hear. I was passing by the living room when I heard her voice again. "She gets emotional over small things," she said. "She is sensitive," my son replied. A pause. Then she said something softer. "Maybe she should stay with someone else for a while. It might be better for everyone." I stopped walking. My breath felt stuck. There was silence after that. And then my son said nothing. Nothing at all. That silence was not loud. It was worse. Because silence can agree without speaking. I walked back to my room slowly, as if my legs had forgotten the way. I sat down and stared at the wall for a long time. I tried to tell myself I had misunderstood. That maybe I had only caught fragments of a conversation. But deep down, I knew what had been said. And I knew something was shifting toward a place I would not be able to stop. That night, I did not eat. I told myself I was not hungry. But the truth was simpler. I was losing the ability to sit at a table where I no longer felt like I belonged. And still, I kept hopping. Because hope is the last thing a mother lets go of, even when everything else has already started to leave her. The idea of leaving the house was not spoken to me directly at first. It arrived in fragments, like broken pieces of a sentence scattered across different days. A suggestion here. A quiet comment there. A pause that lasted too long when I entered a room. And slowly, without anyone needing to say it fully, I understood what was being formed around me. It was not a decision made with anger. It was worse than that. It was a decision made with convenience. One afternoon, I was sitting near the window when my son came into my room. He stood there for a moment, not sitting, not smiling the way he used to when he entered my space as a child. Now he always seemed like he was stepping into something delicate, something that might break with too much honesty. "Amy," he said softly. Just that word already made my heart tighten, because I could hear what followed words like that. "I think we should talk." I looked at him carefully. Something in his face told me he had already rehearsed this conversation in his mind more than once. I nodded. "Tell me," I said. He took a breath. "It might be better if you stay with your sister for some time." The words did not come as a shock. They came as confirmation of something I had been feeling, but refusing to name. Still, hearing them out loud made my throat go dry. I did not speak immediately. Not because I did not understand, but because I needed a moment to accept that this was my reality now. His eyes avoided mine. "It's not that we don't want you here," he added quickly. "It's just things are a bit tense, and she feels uncomfortable sometimes, and I think maybe distance will help." He said she more than I, as if the decision was already shared, already settled somewhere I had not been included in. I looked at my hands. They were calm, strangely calm. I had expected myself to cry, to react, to break. But instead, there was only a deep stillness inside me, like something had already gone too far to reverse. "Do you also feel uncomfortable with me?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. That hesitation answered more than words could. "No," he said finally, "it's not like that." But he did not look at me when he said it. And I understood. Not everything that is true is said clearly. Sometimes truth hides in avoidance, in softened sentences, in people trying not to hurt you while still pushing you away. I stood up slowly. "I see," I said again. That word had become my way of surviving things I could not argue with. I walked past him toward the door, but before leaving the room, I stopped. I turned back. For a moment, I looked at him properly, not as the man he had become, but as the child he once was. The one who used to hold my finger tightly when crossing the road. The one who used to cry if I left him alone for even a few minutes. "I never thought," I said softly, "that I would become a guest in my own child's life." He flinched slightly, but he did not stop me. And that was the most painful part, because silence again had chosen its side. That night I packed slowly. Not because I had much to pack, but because every object felt heavier than usual. Each item carried a memory I did not know how to fold away. A scarf I wore when he graduated. A small box of old letters. A photograph that had lost its color, but not its meaning. I placed things carefully, as if care could delay what was happening. From outside my room, I could hear life continuing. Her voice laughing. His voice responding. The sound of a home that had already adjusted to my absence before I had physically left it. At one point, I paused. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around the room. This room had once been part of the same house I built with my life. Now it felt like a waiting place. A place where endings were being prepared quietly. I whispered to myself, "Is this how it ends?" No one answered. The next morning came too fast. My son helped carry my bag to the door. He did not look relieved, but he also did not look like he was stopping it. That middle space, where someone is not happy but still allows something to happen, is sometimes the most dangerous place of all. She stood slightly behind him, watching, not smiling, not stopping, just observing as if a task had been completed. I looked at her briefly, and she looked back. For the first time, there was no softness in her expression, only certainty. I turned to my son. "Take care of yourself," I said. He nodded. Then I said something I did not plan to say. "I hope one day you understand what I felt in this house." He lowered his eyes, but did not respond. And that silence followed me as I stepped out. The air outside felt different. Larger. Colder. Like the world had not paused for my leaving. And maybe it hadn't. I stood there for a moment, holding my bag, looking back at the house that had once been my life. No one called me back. No one ran after me. No one changed their mind. So I walked forward. Because sometimes a mother does not leave by choice. She leaves because staying no longer recognizes her. The road to my sister's house felt longer than it should have. Not in distance, but in meaning. Every turn of the vehicle carried a thought I could not escape. I kept looking out of the window, watching familiar streets become unfamiliar simply because I was leaving them behind without a promise of return. I told myself I was only going for a short time. Just a temporary arrangement. Just space. But deep inside, I already knew how dangerous temporary can be when no one is counting your return. My sister welcomed me with warmth I had almost forgotten existed. She held my hands too tightly, as if she could physically stop me from breaking further. "You should have come earlier," she said softly, helping me inside. I smiled politely. Because that is what I had learned to do when my emotions had nowhere safe to go. Her house smelled different. It smelled like shared laughter, like family still speaking to each other without hesitation. But I felt like a shadow placed carefully in the corner of that warmth. Not unwanted. Just not expected. The first night there, I could not sleep. I lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a new house settling. And in that silence, my mind kept returning to the house I had left. Not the walls, not the rooms, but the absence of being needed inside them. Days passed slowly. My sister tried to keep me engaged in small conversations, small routines. She would ask me to sit with her, drink tea, watch something on television. I would respond, but my mind was often elsewhere. With him, my son. At first, I told myself not to think too much. That he would call, that he would ask how I was adjusting, that he would feel the distance the way I felt it. But the phone remained quieter than I expected. There were messages at first. Short ones. How are you? Did you reach safely? Then fewer. Then only silence. Each day without his voice felt like something loosening inside me that I did not know how to tighten again. One afternoon, my sister placed her phone in front of me. You should call him, she said gently. I hesitated, because calling someone who is already pulling away is a different kind of courage. But I did. The phone rang. Once, twice, and then he answered. Amy, his voice sounded busy. Yes, I said softly. I just wanted to know if you are okay. A pause. I'm fine, he replied. We're just adjusting here. Wait. Another pause. Yes, me and her. There was something final in the way he said it. As if I had been placed outside that we permanently. I nodded, though he could not see me. I see, I said again. That word was becoming my habit. A way to avoid falling apart in front of people who had already moved on. Before I could say anything else, I heard her voice faintly in the background. Who is it? She asked. My mother, he replied. Just that. Not a call he was happy to receive. Not a voice he missed. Just a category. My mother. I felt my fingers tighten around the phone. Take care, I said finally. Yes, he answered quickly. I have to go now. And the call ended. No hesitation. No lingering goodbye. Just a clean cut. Like something that no longer needed to be held. I sat there for a long time, holding the silent phone. My sister watched me quietly from a distance, but did not interrupt. Because sometimes even comfort understands when silence is heavier than words. That evening, I went to the rooftop. The sky was turning orange again, like it had the first day I realized I was being pushed away. I stood there alone and thought about how strange life becomes when people you once built your world around start learning to live without you. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is slow. Like water draining from a place you thought was full. I remembered his childhood again. The way he used to fall asleep on my lap. The way he used to insist I sit beside him, even when he was grown enough not to need it. The way he used to say, Amy, you are my whole world. And I wondered when I stopped being part of it. Or maybe I never stopped. Maybe I was just moved to a corner of it where I could no longer see the center. That night I cried. Not loudly. Not like the kind of crying that demands attention. But quietly. The kind that happens when someone finally admits to themselves what they have been avoiding. I did not cry because I left my house. I cried because I realized I had already been left long before I physically walked out. The days after that felt different. Not easier. Just clearer. Clarity is not comfort. It is awareness without protection. I began spending more time sitting quietly, observing life around me. My sister would still check on me, still try to involve me in things. But I was slowly learning how to sit with my own thoughts without running from them. And somewhere inside that silence, something unfamiliar started forming. Not acceptance, not peace, but understanding. That love does not always disappear. Sometimes it simply changes the place where it is no longer returned. And that change cannot always be reversed. Only lived through, the days stopped feeling like days after a while. They became something softer, something less defined, hours blending into each other without clear edges. I would wake up, sit by the window, and watch light change shape across the courtyard without feeling the urge to step into it. My sister never asked too many questions anymore. She had understood something I had not said aloud. That grief does not always come with tears that can be comforted. Sometimes it comes as a quiet withdrawal from everything that used to feel normal. Still, in the middle of that quiet, my mind kept returning to my son. Not because I wanted to disturb my own peace, but because a mother does not know how to turn off a connection that was once her entire life. One morning, I received a message. It was short. "We need to talk." Nothing else. No greeting, no softness, no explanation. Just that line sitting on my screen like something unfinished. My hands stayed still for a long time before I replied. "Okay." And then I waited. Waiting has its own kind of punishment. It stretches time, makes every small sound feel like arrival. That evening he called. I recognized his voice immediately, even before he spoke fully. It was the same voice I had raised, the same voice I had comforted, the same voice I had once been the center of. But now it carried distance inside it. "Amy," he said. "Yes," I replied softly. There was a pause again. Lately, his pauses had started speaking more than his words. "I think we should be clear about things," he said. My chest tightened slightly, but I stayed quiet. "About what?" I asked. He exhaled. "About how things are going to be from now on." I already knew what was coming. The mind has a way of recognizing endings before they are announced. Still, hearing it is different from sensing it. "We've been thinking," he continued, "and we feel it's better if you stay with Fuffo for a longer time." Longer time. That phrase did something to me, because it turned temporary into something without a clear end. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them, I said, "And you?" There was confusion in his tone. "What do you mean?" "Do you also feel it's better this way?" I asked again. Silence. Not long, but heavy. Then he said carefully, "It's not about what I feel or don't feel. It's just the situation is difficult." Situation. As if I was not part of the situation. As if I was something placed around it, not inside it. I nodded even though he could not see me. "I understand," I said. And I meant it. Because understanding is not agreement. It is simply the moment you stop, expecting something different. There was another pause. Then his voice softened slightly. "You can visit sometimes," he added, almost as an afterthought. Visit. That word stayed with me longer than anything else he said. Because mothers do not visit their own homes in their children's lives. They either belong there or they don't. "I see," I said again. My voice sounded distant even to me. He seemed relieved that I was not arguing. "Okay then," he said quickly. "I'll call you later." And the line went silent. No goodbye. Just disappearance. I held the phone in my hand for a long time after that. Not because I wanted to call him back, but because I was trying to understand how love becomes something so easily scheduled, so easily limited. That night, I did not sleep. I sat on the bed and looked at the wall in front of me, thinking about everything I had given without counting. Years of care. Years of presence. Years of putting someone else's needs before my own, without calling it sacrifice. And now I was being told, in careful words, that my presence was no longer required in the same way. The next morning, my sister found me sitting in the same place. She did not ask what happened. She already knew from my face. Instead, she sat beside me and placed a hand on mine. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she said softly, "Sometimes children grow in directions we cannot follow." I looked at her, not because I disagreed, but because hearing it spoken out loud made it more real. "I did everything for him," I said quietly. She nodded. "I know." A pause. "And still?" I asked. She did not answer immediately. Because there is no answer that makes injustice feel lighter. Instead, she said, "Still, he is your son." That sentence broke something open in me. Not in a painful way this time, but in a way that forced me to accept a truth I had been resisting. Love does not require fairness to exist, but it does require acceptance of what it becomes. Days after that call, I stopped waiting for my phone to ring as often. Not because I stopped caring, but because I started understanding patterns. There are calls that come from love, and there are calls that come from obligation. And slowly, I was learning the difference between the two. One afternoon, I went for a walk alone. It was the first time I had stepped outside without purpose. The air felt different than the air of my past life. Not better, just unfamiliar. I walked slowly, noticing small things I had ignored for years. Children playing, vendors calling out, people moving forward without hesitation. Life does not stop for anyone's heartbreak. That realization was not comforting, but it was grounding. And somewhere in that walk, I understood something I had not allowed myself to accept before. I was still alive, still here, still capable of existing outside the role I had spent most of my life inside. Not as a mother someone depended on, but as a person who still had to live her own remaining days. And that thought did not heal me, but it changed something in the way I carried myself back home that evening. Not lighter, not heavier, just more aware. That night, I did not return to my usual silence. Something inside me had started refusing the quiet the way it used to accept it. I sat by the window longer than usual, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. My sister was already asleep, the house settled into its predictable rhythm, but my mind stayed awake, circling the same thoughts again and again. I kept hearing his voice. Not just what he said, but how he said it. Visit sometimes. As if I had been moved out of a life and given permission to occasionally observe it from a distance. That word, visit, kept repeating in my head until it lost its meaning and became only a sound. The next morning, I woke up earlier than everyone else. Not because I wanted to, but because sleep had started feeling incomplete, like something I could no longer finish properly. I made tea quietly and sat in the kitchen alone. For the first time, I did not immediately think of my son when I woke up. That realization surprised me. It did not hurt. It only felt strange, like discovering a room in your own house you never noticed before. A place where your thoughts had started shifting away without permission. My sister came in later and noticed my silence. "You're thinking too much again," she said gently, placing a plate in front of me. I smiled slightly. "Maybe I don't know how to stop anymore," I replied. She sat across from me. "Then don't stop," she said. "Just don't drown in it." I did not respond, but I understood what she meant. That day passed slowly. And somewhere in the middle of it, something unexpected happened. My son called again. This time, there was no message before it. No warning. Just the phone ringing while I was sitting in the courtyard. My hands hesitated before answering. "Yes," I said. "Amy," he said again. His voice sounded different this time. Not softer. Just uncertain. "I just wanted to check on you," he added. That sentence caught me off guard. Because it was the first time in a long while that he was asking something from a place that sounded like concern, not duty. "I am fine," I replied slowly. "How are you?" A pause. "I'm okay," he said. "Things are okay." Another silence followed. I waited, not pushing, not filling it. Then he spoke again. "She is traveling for a few days," he said. I did not immediately understand why he was telling me this. But then he continued. "So the house is quiet." Something about the way he said quiet made me pause. Because I knew that kind of quiet. The kind that is not peaceful. The kind that makes you notice everything you were previously distracted from. "I see," I said softly. There was another pause. And then, unexpectedly, his voice dropped slightly. "Amy, are you okay there?" It was such a simple question. But it carried weight. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. "I am learning to be," I said honestly. There was silence on the other end. Not uncomfortable. Just reflective. Then he said something I did not expect. "I think I was not fair to you." Those words stayed in the air longer than any previous conversation. I did not respond immediately. Because I needed to understand if I had heard them correctly. "You were under pressure," I said finally. "No," he replied quickly. "That's not an excuse." Another pause. Then softer. "I didn't handle things well." For a moment, I felt something inside me loosen. Not forgiveness. Not relief. Just recognition that he had finally looked at something he had been avoiding. But even then, I did not let myself lean into it too much. Because I had learned that moments of clarity do not always change outcomes. Sometimes they only explain them. "I don't blame you," I said gently. "You should," he replied almost immediately. That surprised me. Because it sounded like he was trying to place responsibility back where he felt it belonged. But I did not want that either. Blame is heavy in both directions. "I am your mother," I said quietly. "I have no interest in blaming you." Another silence. This one longer. Then he said, "I miss how things used to be." That sentence did something to my chest. Not because it was new, but because it echoed something I had been carrying alone for a long time. "I miss it too," I admitted. And it was true. We stayed on the call little longer after that. Not discussing anything important. Just small fragments of conversation. As if we were both testing whether connection still existed between us in any form. When the call ended, I did not feel healed. But I also did not feel empty. I felt something in between. A space where grief and connection were briefly sharing the same place without conflict. That evening, I told my sister about the call. She listened carefully, then nodded. "People don't always lose love," she said. "Sometimes they just lose direction." I thought about that for a long time. That night, I found myself sitting outside again. The air was cooler. The sky clearer. And for the first time in many days, I did not feel completely separated from the world around me. Not because anything had changed externally, but because something inside me had stopped expecting closure from places that were still in motion. My son had not returned to me. Not fully. Not in the way I once imagined. But something had shifted. Not the ending. Not the beginning. Something in between. And I was learning that life is often lived in that space more than anywhere else. Between what was lost and what is still becoming. After that call, I began to notice something I had ignored for a long time. My son was not the same person I kept remembering. And I was not the same mother I kept trying to be in my memories. Both of us were living in different versions of the past. And neither of those versions could survive in the present we were now in. The days that followed felt quieter in a different way. Not empty, just less sharp. Like something inside me had stopped resisting every silence. I still thought of him, but not with the same urgency that used to wake me up in the middle of the night. Now it came in waves. Sometimes mild. Sometimes heavier. But no longer constant. One afternoon, my sister asked me to go with her to the local market. At first I refused. Not because I was unwilling, but because I had started avoiding places where life moved too quickly around me. But she insisted, in a way that was gentle but firm. "You need air that doesn't belong to memories," she said. That sentence stayed with me. So I went. The market was loud, alive, and indifferent. People bargaining, calling out, laughing, arguing over prices that mattered deeply in the moment, but would be forgotten by evening. I walked beside my sister slowly, holding a small bag, observing more than participating. And somewhere between the noise and movement, I realized something simple. Life was not waiting for me to catch up. It never had. It simply continued, no matter who was left behind. On the way back, my sister stopped to buy fruit from a small stall. I stood aside, watching. And that's when I saw a mother with her young son nearby. The boy was insisting on something, some small toy, something cheap and bright. The mother was tired, clearly not in the mood, but she still smiled and gave in eventually. The boy laughed, holding the toy like it was everything in the world. I felt something inside me tighten. Not jealousy. Not pain exactly. Just memory. Because I remembered my son like that. Simple joys. Simple needs. Simple closeness. And I wondered when simplicity had turned into distance. When love had become something that required negotiation instead of presence. That night, I could not sleep again. But this time, it was not because of sadness alone. It was because my mind had started asking questions I had avoided for too long. Had I held on too tightly in ways I did not realize? Had I expected permanence from something that was always meant to change? Or had I simply been replaced in a natural flow of life that I was emotionally refusing to accept? There were no clear answers. Only discomfort. And reflection. A few days later, I received another message from him. This one was different. "Can I come see you?" Just that. No explanation. No context. I stared at the message for a long time. My first instinct was emotional. A part of me immediately softened. But another part of me hesitated. Because visits carry weight when relationships are fragile. They do not always bring comfort. Sometimes they bring confrontation. I replied after a long pause. Yes. The day he came, I did not tell myself to expect anything. But expectations do not always need permission. They form on their own. When I saw him at the door, something inside me reacted instantly. He looked tired. Not physically exhausted in a dramatic way, but in the way people look when they have been carrying thoughts for too long without sharing them properly. We stood there for a moment before speaking. Neither of us moved first. Then he said, "Assalamu alaikum." And I answered softly, "Walaikum assalam." He stepped inside slowly, as if unsure how much of himself still belonged in this space. We sat in the living room. Silence came quickly, but it was not the same kind of silence we had before. This one was more aware, more careful. "I came alone," he said after a while. I nodded. "Okay." Another pause. Then he looked at me properly and said something that surprised me again. I didn't realize how empty things felt until she left for a few days. I listened, not interrupting. "I mean," he continued, searching for words, "the house, the routine, it all felt structured before. But when she wasn't there, I started noticing things I had ignored." I understood what he meant, because absence reveals what presence often hides. He leaned forward slightly. "I think I made everything too complicated," he said. I stayed quiet, because I had learned that some realizations are not invitations for immediate response. They are simply acknowledgments of internal change. "I don't know how to fix everything," he added. I looked at him carefully. "You don't always fix everything," I said gently. "Sometimes you only understand it better." He nodded slowly. Then there was a long silence again. But this one felt different, less defensive, less distant, more human. After a while, he spoke again. "Do you hate me?" The question came unexpectedly. Not dramatic, but direct. I shook my head. "No," I said immediately. He seemed to relax slightly, but not fully. "Then what do you feel?" he asked. That question stayed in the air longer than the others. Because it required honesty, not protection. I thought carefully before answering. "I feel distance," I said finally. "Not anger, not hate, just distance that formed slowly." He nodded, as if accepting that truth was harder than hearing it. "I don't want that," he said quietly. I believed him. But wanting something and knowing how to rebuild it are two very different things. Before he left that day, he hesitated at the door, then turned back. "Amy," he said. "Yes, I will try." That was all. Not a promise of change. Not a guarantee of return. Just an intention. And for the first time in a long time, I did not feel like I had to hold on too tightly to those words. Because I was beginning to understand something important. Not all healing comes from restoration. Some of it comes from acceptance of what can no longer return to its original shape. And still continuing forward anyway. After he left that day, the house felt different again. But this time, the difference was not painful in the same way. It was quieter, yes, but not empty. It was the kind of quiet that comes after something heavy has been spoken aloud and no longer needs to be carried only inside the body. I found myself sitting in the same chair for a long time after the door closed behind him. Not thinking in sharp thoughts. Just sitting. Letting everything settle. My sister noticed the change in me the next morning. "You look less tense," she said while pouring tea. I didn't know how to respond at first. Because I wasn't sure if less tense meant better or simply more resigned. So I only said, "He came." She looked up. "And?" I paused. "He spoke," I said carefully. "Not everything, but something." She nodded slowly, as if she understood that sometimes something is enough for a start, even if it is not enough for an ending. The days after that visit did not suddenly become easier, but they became more structured in a way I could manage. I started waking up at the same time each morning without feeling lost. I started helping more around the house. Small things. Simple routines. The kind of life that does not demand emotional explanations every hour. But still, my mind would return to him. Not constantly now. Just in moments. When I saw something familiar. When I heard a voice that reminded me of his tone. When I passed by places that held old memories I had not yet fully unpacked. One afternoon, my sister brought up something gently. "You know," she said, "you should not wait in silence now." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" She placed her cup down carefully. "If he is trying," she said, "you also have to decide how you want to exist in that effort, not just receive it." That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected. Because for so long, I had existed only in response. As a mother waiting. A mother adjusting. A mother absorbing everything without asking what she needed in return. That night, I thought deeply about what she said. Not in a rushed emotional way, but slowly. Like turning a page carefully so it doesn't tear. A few days later, my son called again. This time, I answered without hesitation. "Yes," I said. "Amy," he replied. His voice sounded more stable than before. "I was thinking," he said, "can I come again this weekend?" A pause. Then he added, "If you are okay with it." That last part mattered. Because it was no longer assumed. It was asked. I took a breath. "Yes," I said. Then, after a moment, I added something I had not said before. But we need to talk properly this time. There was silence on his end. Then he said, okay. Not defensive. Not avoidant. Just accepting. When he came that weekend, the atmosphere was different from the first visit. Less tension, but also less uncertainty. We sat outside this time, not inside closed walls. The air between us felt more open. He started speaking first. I've been thinking a lot, he said. I nodded, listening. I think I got too influenced by everything around me, he continued. Opinions, pressure, expectations. I didn't balance things properly. I didn't interrupt. Because this time, he was not running from the truth. He was trying to understand it. I should have protected our relationship better, he said quietly. That sentence touched something in me. Not because it fixed anything, but because it acknowledged something I had carried alone for a long time. I also made mistakes, I said softly after a pause. He looked at me immediately. No, he said. I shook my head slightly. Yes, I replied. Not because I stopped loving you, but because I didn't always know how to let you grow without feeling like I was being left behind. That honesty created a silence between us. But it was not a painful silence. It was a reflective one. For the first time, we were both standing in the same truth, even if from different sides of it. He looked down. I don't want you to feel left behind, he said. I believed him. But belief and reality still had distance to cover. I don't want to compete for space in your life, I said gently. He immediately shook his head. You're not competition, he said quickly. I looked at him. I know, I replied, but feelings don't always follow logic. He went quiet again. Then he said something more careful. I think I need to learn how to balance both parts of my life properly. I nodded. That takes time, I said. Yes, he agreed. And for the first time, time itself felt like something we could both acknowledge without fear. Not as an enemy, but as a process. Before leaving, he hesitated again. But this time, he did not look lost. Just thoughtful. I will call more regularly, he said. I smiled slightly. Don't force it, I replied. Just be consistent. He nodded. Then he left. And this time, I did not feel like something had ended again. I felt like something had started slowly reshaping itself. Not repaired. Not restored. But becoming something different than before. And I was beginning to understand that not all changes return things to their original place. Some changes simply teach you how to live in a new version of love. One that is less absolute, but more aware. The visits did not suddenly turn everything back into what it once was. Nothing returns like that. Life does not rewind itself just because people begin to understand each other again. But something subtle had changed between us now. Not trust fully restored. Not distance fully erased. But a kind of awareness that we were both trying, imperfectly, slowly, and without certainty of outcome. Still, healing is never a straight path. It bends. It hesitates. It breaks into old patterns when you least expect it. And I felt that clearly one evening when I overheard something I was not meant to hear again. My son had come to visit briefly. He was sitting in the courtyard speaking on the phone, his voice lower than usual. I was inside, not intending to listen, but his words carried through the open window. I'm trying, he was saying, but she still gets emotional sometimes. A pause. Then softer. Yes, I know. I just don't want things to go back to how stressful they were before. My hand stopped mid-task. I did not move closer. But I did not move away either. There was another pause, and then he said something that stayed with me longer than I expected. I just need balance, that's all. Balance. That word again. It had become a bridge he was trying to build between two sides of his life. But bridges, I was learning, are not always equally stable from both ends. When he came inside later, I did not mention what I heard. Not because I was avoiding conflict, but because I was trying to understand whether I was still reacting from old wounds or from present reality. We sat together quietly for a while. The conversation was light at first. Normal things. Food. Weather. Routine. But I could feel something underneath his words again. A carefulness. As if he was still measuring how much space he could safely occupy between his life, now, and the life he had left behind. At one point, I asked him softly, "Do you feel pressure when you come here?" He looked up immediately. "No," he said. But then he hesitated. And added, "Not pressure, just responsibility." That word was heavier. Responsibility meant he was still carrying something, not just visiting freely. I nodded slowly. "I don't want you to feel like you are carrying anything," I said gently. He looked at me for a moment. "I don't know how not to," he admitted. That honesty again. Raw. Unfiltered. Human. And I realized something important in that moment. We were not struggling because we didn't care about each other. We were struggling because we cared differently. And those differences had consequences neither of us had fully understood before. That night, after he left, I found myself standing in front of the mirror for a long time. Not examining my appearance, but trying to understand the version of myself I had become through all of this. The mother who once only gave. The mother who was pushed into silence. The mother who now had to learn how to exist outside of being constantly needed. And I wondered if I could ever become something beyond that identity without losing myself completely. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I went outside alone earlier than usual. The air was cooler, softer. The streets were slowly waking up. I walked without purpose at first. Just movement. Just breath. And somewhere in that walk, I realized something simple but important. I was not only someone's mother. I was also someone who was still here. Still thinking. Still feeling. Still becoming. That realization did not erase pain. But it changed its shape. It made it less like something I was trapped inside, and more like something I was moving through. Later that day, my sister noticed something in me again. "You seem more present," she said. I smiled slightly. "I think I stopped waiting for things to return the way they were," I replied. She nodded. "That's a difficult thing to accept," she said. "Yes," I agreed, "but maybe necessary." Days passed after that without any major conversations. But something inside me was shifting quietly. I no longer measured my day by whether he called or not. I no longer held my breath, waiting for emotional certainty. Instead, I began observing life in smaller pieces again. The sound of water boiling. The rhythm of footsteps in the house. The way light changed in different hours. And slowly, without forcing it, I started feeling like I was part of time again instead of standing outside it. Then one afternoon, my son called unexpectedly. His voice was different again. Not distant this time. Not careful. But slightly unsettled. "Amy," he said. "Yes." "I think I need your advice," he admitted. That surprised me. Because for a long time, he had stopped asking me things that required deeper thought. I stayed quiet, listening. He continued. "It's just, I feel like I'm not managing everything properly. Work, home, relationships, it's getting difficult again." There was honesty in his tone that felt unguarded. Not defensive. Not rehearsed. Just tired. I took a slow breath. "Life becomes heavy when we try to carry everything alone," I said gently. He stayed silent for a moment. Then he said, "I don't want to lose control again." I understood what he meant. Not control over others, but control over his own life's balance. "I think," I said carefully. You are learning what many people only understand after losing balance first. A pause. Then softly. I wish I had understood earlier. There it was again. Regret. Not dramatic. Not loud. But real. And for the first time, I did not feel the need to absorb it fully. I could acknowledge it without letting it consume me. That's why we learn, I said simply. And he did not argue. He just listened. And in that silence, something between us settled, not resolved, but softened. The conversations did not fix everything, but they changed how I listened. Before, I used to listen like a mother holding her breath, waiting for either closeness to return or distance to deepen. Now, I listened more like someone trying to understand life as it is, not as she wished it would be. Still, even understanding does not protect you from old pain returning unexpectedly. It came one evening when my son did not call for several days. At first, I did not think much of it. He had become inconsistent at times, sometimes busy, sometimes overwhelmed, sometimes simply lost in his own routine. But as the silence stretched longer, something familiar began to rise inside me again. That old feeling. The one that makes you question whether your place in someone's life is stable or slowly fading again. My sister noticed my change in mood before I said anything. You're quieter again, she said gently while serving dinner. I tried to smile. It's nothing, I replied. But she didn't believe me. She rarely did when it came to emotional silence. On the fourth day, I finally called him. The phone rang longer than usual. Each ring felt like a reminder that connection is not guaranteed just because it once existed. Then he answered. Amy, he said, slightly out of breath. Yes, I replied. I was about to call you, he said quickly. That sentence should have comforted me. But I had learned to listen beyond words. Are you busy? I asked. A bit, he admitted. Work has been hectic again. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. There was a pause. Then I asked softly, everything okay at home? Another pause. Longer this time. Yes, he said, but his voice lowered slightly. Just small issues again. Small issues. That phrase had started to mean large things spoken lightly. I didn't press further. Because I had also learned that sometimes pressure does not bring truth. It only creates resistance. I just wanted to hear your voice, I said gently. There was silence on the other end. Not uncomfortable. Just human. I'm sorry I didn't call, he said after a moment. I understand, I replied. And I did. More than I had before. But understanding did not erase the small sting of being temporarily forgotten in someone else's busy life. Before ending the call, he said something unexpected. Amy, I think I'm still figuring out how to manage everything properly. I stayed quiet. Then he added, sometimes I feel like I'm failing both sides. That sentence stayed with me because it revealed something deeper than conflict. It revealed exhaustion. I don't think you are failing, I said slowly. I think you are overwhelmed. He didn't respond immediately. Then softly, maybe both. And for the first time, I didn't try to correct him. Because sometimes people need to name their own struggle before they can move through it. After the call ended, I sat quietly for a long time. Not analyzing it. Just holding it. That evening, I told my sister everything. She listened carefully, as she always did. Then she said, he is not rejecting you anymore. He is just struggling to balance his life. I looked at her. And where does that leave me? I asked honestly. She paused. That depends on where you choose to stand in your own life now, she replied. That sentence lingered in my mind for days. Because for so long, I had only stood in relation to others. Now I was being asked, quietly, gently, to stand for myself as well. The next time my son came to visit, Something felt different immediately. Not dramatically, but subtly. He looked more aware, less distracted, as if something inside him had started settling into awareness rather than avoidance. We sat together in the courtyard again. This time, the silence between us felt less like distance and more like space. Space that could hold conversation without pressure. He spoke first. "I've been thinking about what you said," he admitted. I nodded. "And?" He exhaled slowly. "I think I've been trying to fix everything at once, and it's not working." I listened, not interrupting. Then he added, "I think I need to slow down and be more intentional." That word, intentional, felt important, because it suggested awareness, not reaction. "That sounds like a good realization," I said gently. He looked at me. "I don't want you to feel like you are outside my life," he said suddenly. I met his eyes. "I never felt outside it completely," I replied honestly, "but I did feel less included in parts of it." He nodded slowly. "That's what I'm trying to fix," he said. I didn't respond immediately, because fixing emotional distance is not a single action. It is a continuous effort. "I am here," I said softly, "but I am also learning not to disappear inside waiting anymore." He seemed to understand what I meant, and he nodded again. That visit did not erase everything, but it marked something important. A shift from confusion to acknowledgement. And acknowledgement, I was beginning to understand, is the first real step toward rebuilding anything meaningful. After he left, I did not feel the old heaviness return as strongly as before. It was still there, but quieter, more distant. And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to believe that relationships do not only break or end. Sometimes, they slowly learn new ways of existing. Even if imperfect, even if incomplete, even if still in progress. After that visit, something subtle began to change in the rhythm of my days. Not in dramatic ways. There were no sudden transformations, no perfect resolutions, no clear return to how things once were. But there was movement again. And after so long feeling emotionally suspended, movement itself felt like a kind of relief. My son started calling more consistently. Not perfectly, not predictably, but more than before. And each call carried less distance than the last. Sometimes he would just ask how I was. Sometimes he would talk about his day. And sometimes there would be long pauses where neither of us felt the need to fill the silence quickly. Those pauses no longer felt like absence. They felt like space we were both learning to share without fear. One evening, I asked him something I had avoided for a long time. "Are you happy?" I said gently. He hesitated. I could hear him breathe on the other side of the line. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "I think I'm calmer now than before, but not fully settled yet." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "Calm is still progress," I said softly. He gave a small sound of agreement. Then he added something quietly. "I think I misunderstood a lot of things before." I didn't respond immediately, because I had also misunderstood many things. Not out of ignorance, but out of emotional urgency. When you love someone deeply, you don't always interpret things clearly. You interpret them through fear of loss or hope of closeness. "I think we both did," I said finally. That simple truth settled between us without resistance. A few days later, he visited again. This time, he brought something with him. Not physically heavy, but emotionally significant. He looked more grounded when he arrived. Less conflicted. He sat down and after a few moments said, "I talked to her." I understood immediately who he meant. I stayed quiet, letting him continue. "I told her I need to balance things differently," he said, "and that I don't want my relationship with you to feel distant or conditional." I listened carefully. He wasn't blaming anyone now. He was taking responsibility for structure, for choices, for boundaries. And, I asked gently. She didn't agree immediately, he admitted, but she listened. That mattered. Listening does not solve everything, but it opens the door for understanding to enter. I don't want conflict in your life, I said softly. He shook his head. It's not conflict, he replied. It's adjustment. I should have done it earlier. There was honesty in his voice that felt more stable than before. Not emotional urgency, but clarity forming slowly. We sat for a while after that without speaking. But it was not uncomfortable anymore. It was reflective. Two people trying to understand how to exist in each other's lives without losing themselves in the process. Later that day, he said something that stayed with me longer than anything else. I used to think I had to choose one side fully, he admitted, but I think I was wrong. I looked at him. What do you think now? I asked. He paused. I think I need to learn how to hold both without neglecting either. That sentence carried weight. Because it was not about promises. It was about learning. And learning is slower than emotion, but more stable than impulse. After he left that day, I felt something unfamiliar. Not happiness. Not closure. But a quiet sense of steadiness, forming in places that had long felt unstable. That night, I sat alone and thought about everything that had happened. The distance. The separation. The return. The conversations that had slowly rebuilt what silence had damaged. And I realized something important. I had spent so much time feeling like I was being pushed out of a life. But what was actually happening was more complicated. Life was not removing me. It was changing shape. And I had been learning, slowly, how to remain part of it in a different way. Not as the center of everything, but not as nothing either. As something that still mattered, even if differently than before. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual again. But this time, the silence did not feel heavy. It felt open. And for the first time in a long while, I did not wake up waiting for something to change my day. I simply woke up. And that was enough. That morning felt like any other morning at first. The light came through the window the same way it always had, soft and slow, touching the floor in familiar patterns. My sister was already awake, moving around the house quietly, preparing tea as she usually did. But something inside me was different. Not healed. Not completely at peace. Just no longer waiting in the same painful way. Waiting had once defined me more than I realized. Waiting for calls. Waiting for clarity. Waiting for my place to be acknowledged again. Now, I was learning how to exist even when waiting did not promise anything in return. My son came that afternoon. He didn't announce it with a long message this time. He just arrived. When I opened the door, I saw him standing there for a moment as if checking something in himself before stepping inside. Assalamu alaikum, Ami, he said softly. Walaikum assalam, I replied. And for the first time in a long time, the greeting did not feel like distance or formality. It felt like connection trying again. We sat in the courtyard. The same place where so many conversations had shifted between silence and truth. But today, there was no heaviness in the air. Only awareness. He looked around for a moment before speaking. It feels calmer here, he said. I nodded slightly. It always was, I replied. Maybe we just didn't feel it before. He smiled faintly at that. A small, tired smile. Then he leaned forward slightly, hands clasped together. I wanted to say something properly today, he said. I didn't interrupt. I know I caused you pain, he continued. Not intentionally, but still. I stayed quiet. Because some truths do not need immediate response. I think I let confusion and pressure take over more than I should have, he said honestly. And I didn't protect your place in my life the way I should have. That sentence settled between us like something finally acknowledged. Not to be argued with. Not to be erased. Just understood. I took a slow breath. I also didn't always understand how to let you live your own life without feeling like I was losing mine, I said gently. He looked at me immediately. But you were never losing me, he said. I nodded slowly. I know, I replied, but feelings don't always follow what we know. Silence followed. Not heavy this time. Just real. Then he said something softer. I don't want distance like before. I looked at him carefully. Then don't build life around distance, I said gently. Build it around balance and consistency, not emotion alone. He nodded. I'm trying, he said again. And this time, I believed it differently. Not as hope, but as effort in progress. We sat for a while longer, without forcing conversation. And in that silence, something had finally settled. Not everything repaired. Not everything resolved. But something stabilized. Before leaving, he stood at the door and paused. Then turned back. Amy, he said. Yes. I will keep trying, he said again, but this time more grounded. Not just saying it. I smiled slightly. I know, I said. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was holding on to words. I felt like I was witnessing change, unfold in its imperfect form. After he left, I remained seated in the courtyard for a long time. The air felt different. Not because life had returned to how it once was, but because I had stopped measuring life only by loss. I thought about everything I had been through. The separation. The silence. The confusion. The return. And I realized something simple but deep. I had not lost everything. I had lost a version of closeness. But not love itself. Love had changed shape. It had become more complicated. More human. Less absolute. But still present. And I too had changed. I was no longer only the mother waiting at the center of someone else's world. I was someone learning to exist fully within her own, even while still loving deeply. That evening, I made tea and sat quietly by the window. Not waiting. Not aching. Just present. And for the first time in a long while, that presence felt enough. Not perfect. Not final. But enough to continue living forward. And that was where my story no longer felt like an ending, but like a continuation. Not of loss. Not of return. But of learning how to live with both. Together, and so, life did not end in the way I once feared it would. There was no dramatic reconciliation that erased everything that had happened, no sudden return to the past as if nothing had broken. Instead, there was something quieter, something more real. We learned to exist differently. My son did not stop being his own person, and I did not stop being his mother. But the space between those two identities stopped feeling like a wound. It became something we could walk through without hurting each other every time. Some days were still difficult. Some conversations still carried old weight. And some silences still reminded me of what had once been lost. But they no longer defined everything. Because slowly, I had stopped measuring my worth by how close I was to being needed in the same way as before. And he, slowly, learned how to include me without feeling pressure or guilt. Life did not return to what it was. It became something else entirely. Something imperfect. Something still forming. But something that could be lived in without breaking completely. And in that quiet space between what was lost and what was rebuilt, I finally understood. I had not lost everything. I had only learned how to live after losing what I once thought was everything. And that was where my story continued.